Some cases just haunt us. It's not only about the crimes themselves, but it's that chilling silence that follows, the questions that just hang in the air for decades, sometimes even centuries. Today, we're going to step into the shadows of 5 of history's most infamous, most baffling unsolved murders, and really try to understand why their stories refuse to fade away.
And that's really the big question here, isn't it? In an age with all our science and incredible detection methods, how can these huge, monumental crimes just stay cold? What is it that makes a mystery truly immortal? So, in this explainer, we're going on a journey. We'll go from the foggy streets of Victorian London all the way to the sunny suburbs of 1990s America, and we'll dig into the chilling details and, just as importantly, the critical mistakes that have made these 5 cases absolutely unforgettable. Okay, we have to start with the case that you could argue pretty much invented the idea of the modern serial killer. We're in 1888 in the grim, desperate district of Whitechapel in London, which suddenly became the hunting ground for a phantom who would become an absolute legend. I mean, it was a brutal and terrifyingly fast killing spree. In just a few months, 5 women, who we now call the canonical 5, the victims that most experts agree were killed by the same person, were murdered and horribly mutilated. And the killer's methods? They were so shockingly precise, suggesting this person had a deep knowledge of human anatomy, which led a lot of people to think he had to be a doctor or a surgeon. But what really cemented this killer in history was his sheer audacity. He actually taunted the police and the press, sending hundreds of letters. The most infamous one, the From Hell letter, was sent with a small box. Inside was what he claimed was half of a human kidney, taken from one of his victims. And that's how he got his legendary name, Jack the Ripper. So why was he never caught? Well, the killer's cunning was just way beyond what 19th century police could handle. I mean, they had no forensics as we know them today, no fingerprinting, no DNA, nothing. They were left with a list of over 100 potential suspects, everybody from local butchers to members of the royal family, but they had no scientific way to prove a thing. The Ripper just melted back into the London fog, never to be seen again. From the chaos of the city, we're now going somewhere completely different, a remote, isolated farm in Bavaria, Germany. And I have to tell you, this next case is one of the most deeply unsettling in history. It's a true story of a home invasion that just defies all logic. The story kicks off with this one unbelievably terrifying detail. In the days before the crime, the father of the family told his neighbors he'd found a set of footprints in the snow. They led from the dark forest right up to his farmhouse, but there were no footprints leading away. And that sense of dread just keeps building. The family started hearing footsteps coming from their own attic. A newspaper they had never bought just mysteriously showed up. Then the house keys vanished. It was like their home had been slowly, quietly, patiently infiltrated by someone they couldn't see.
Now here's the part that is just mind-bending. After murdering all 6 members of the family with a pickaxe, the killer didn't run. He stayed. For 3 whole days, he lived in that house with the bodies, eating the family's food, keeping the fire going, and even feeding the farm animals. The motive? We still have no idea. Nothing of value was taken. The uninvited guest was never, ever found.
All right, let's jump across the Atlantic to post-war Los Angeles. This was a city of dreams, but for one aspiring actress, it became the backdrop for a gruesome, real-life film noir tragedy.
The body of a 22-year-old woman named Elizabeth Short was found in a vacant lot, and the state she was in was just horrific. She had been subjected to something called a hemicorporectomy, which is a clinical way of saying her body had been severed completely in 2 at the waist, and with surgical precision. The sheer meticulousness of the crime is what's so chilling. Her body had been completely drained of blood, making her skin look like porcelain. Her face was carved into this grotesque Glasgow smile, and maybe most disturbing of all, she had been bathed and cleaned before being posed in that lot. In fact, the first person who saw her actually thought she was a broken mannequin. This wasn't some messy crime of passion. It was a calm, cold, ritualistic display. So, what happened? Well, the case became a massive media sensation, and that attention is what ultimately sealed its fate. The intense publicity led to over 50 people falsely confessing to the murder just to get a little taste of fame. These fake leads completely swamped the real investigation, burying any chance of finding the killer under an absolute avalanche of lies. So, we just talked about a killer who performed a meticulous, hidden crime. Now we're going to turn to someone who is the exact opposite. Someone who craved the spotlight. In the late 1960s, Northern California was terrorized by a murderer who didn't just want to kill, he wanted to play a game with the entire world. This is a direct quote from the Zodiac Killer himself. He would send these cryptic letters and incredibly complex ciphers to newspapers, threatening more attacks if they weren't published. This line here is from his most notorious puzzle, the Z340 cipher, which was so difficult it took experts over half a century to solve. 51 years. Let that sink in. For 51 years, his taunts remained a complete mystery, which just goes to show how complex his puzzles were. It actually took a team of private citizens using modern computing power to finally crack it in 2020, long after the trail had gone ice cold.
So, unlike Jack the Ripper, who just vanished into the shadows, the Zodiac used the U.S. Postal Service to make himself the terrifying main character in his own twisted story. His identity was the ultimate puzzle, and it's a puzzle we still haven't solved. He just stopped writing in the early 70s and disappeared. For our final case, we're coming into the modern era. This is a case that played out on 24-hour news and split public opinion right down the middle. A tragedy that started in a wealthy Colorado home on the morning after Christmas. At the very heart of this mystery is one of the strangest pieces of evidence in the history of crime, the ransom note. First off, it was bizarrely long, 2.5 pages. It was written on a notepad from inside the Ramsey house with a pen that belonged to the family. And the ransom amount? Exactly $118,000, which just so happened to be the precise amount of John Ramsey's recent work bonus. All of these details just screamed that something was very wrong.
And this case is just full of contradictions, which basically created two warring theories. You have the intruder theory, which points to unidentified DNA found on John Benet's clothes and a broken basement window. But then you have the family theory, which points to the fact that there were no footprints in the snow outside, that ridiculously specific ransom note, and the fact that the father found the body in their own wine cellar hours after police had already arrived. So why, with all of our modern technology, is this case still cold? Well, the answer is frustratingly simple. The most basic rules of investigation were completely broken. In those first critical hours, the police failed to seal off the house. Friends and family were allowed to just walk through, destroying potential evidence and contaminating the crime scene beyond any hope of repair.
And all this brings us to one last thought. From the foggy alleyways of 1888 to a suburban basement in 1996, every one of these killers managed to evade justice. But it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If these crimes happen today, with our advanced DNA databases, surveillance cameras on every corner, and digital forensics, would any of these shadows have actually survived long enough to become legends?